Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a quick spin through the biggest headlines in the sport. This week, we are right back in the thick of it with two events in the space of 4 days in Jacksonville, Florida. It means we're in the middle of a jam-packed fight week, and we got a stack of talking points to chat through. Like a kind man giving up his seat for an old lady on the bus, John Morgan has let me take over the hosting chair this week. But fear not, he is still here. And this time, he'll be firing over his takes direct from Jacksonville itself. And of course, we're joined by the OGs of MMA Junkie Radio, Gorgeous George and Goes. They're both on deck with their opinions primed and ready. So let's get this thing started and get the boys back on the clock. Where else can we start, guys, but with UFC 249? It was the first major sporting event since the COVID-19 shutdown, and it proved to be a roller coaster of a week. With the news on Friday night that Ronaldo Jacare Souza and two of his coaches had tested positive for coronavirus. His fight was scrapped, but the show went on regardless. And despite playing out to an empty arena, the night produced a spectacular set of fights on a landmark, unique night for the sport. So, all things considered, gents, would you call UFC 249 a success? We've got 3 minutes on the clock. John, kick us off.
I think you have to call it a success. You really do, man. I mean, overall, just getting back to work is big. You know, being the first sport back, and for Dana White to be able to live up to that promise that he was going to bring live sports back to the U.S. first before anybody else, they lived up to it. Now, was it 100%? No, it wasn't. I mean, the Jacare news, I think, certainly was a little bit concerning for everyone, but it was also probably a little bit inevitable as well. I mean, getting through this whole thing with nobody testing positive for COVID-19, I don't know that that's going to happen just based on what we're seeing in society, but at least he was asymptomatic. And to be honest, I didn't see Jacare other than the face-offs. Now, the face-offs, that's the part where we might need to talk about a little bit. You know, the Dana White fist bumps and the hugs and all that. I don't know that it's necessarily a danger, but it's certainly a possibility for some cross-contamination and some spread. So I'll be interested to see if things change a little bit with that over the weeks coming. But overall, I think it's a success. It was a proof of concept. They delivered on what they said they were going to do, and I think it helped them learn. They had this theory of how they thought they could get it done. They put it into practice. I think it probably provided some valuable lessons moving forward.
Yeah, they said they could put the show on. They put the show on with very few kinks in it from a broadcast perspective. But George, what do you reckon? Did the UFC really show the sports world that it is possible to do an event safely during this COVID-19 lockdown?
They sure did. They pulled it off. I thought everybody that was at home that I was communicating with had a great time, whether they were an MMA fan or just a sports fan, or somebody that wanted to return to normalcy fan, an Earth fan, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. It hit perfectly at the right time, in my opinion. And you could tell, a lot of people were chiming in via social media. You could see that on the broadcast. It was the same thing that I was receiving from my friends, whether they were hardcores or casual. Same thing. They were loving it. They were at home and they were loving it. Now, that said, we, like John and you stated, Simon, that was unfortunate what happened with Jacare. And I would say, from my bits of watching the news as a concerned citizen, when he told the UFC he had, that he had contact with a relative that was infected, I think in that little sequence right there is maybe where when Dana White said, we're going to learn and we're going to apply it for the next couple shows, we have to learn from that one, because that to me sounded like maybe right away, right then and there, he should have been isolated. And then, of course, we found out about the two coaches. But, hey, those fights, they delivered, man. And my hat's off to all of them for going out there under that stress. They did well. I enjoyed it.
And Goes, it was the UFC's first crack at hosting a show under these pretty trying circumstances. They've done one. Now we've got two more coming down the pipe pretty quickly. What changes do you think they need to make? What tweaks do they need to look at moving forward, do you think?
I think George is right in his assessment. They really have to do testing from home first and then do it again when they get there, because there's so many people you can come in contact with. That would probably be my main thing that you got to do first, is get that testing done before they arrive.
Excellent. And the main event delivered as advertised, and Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje delivered an absolute barn burner of a fight to close out the night at UFC 249. Gaethje produced his best performance in a set of UFC gloves as he captured that UFC interim lightweight title with a brilliant display against a man long considered to be the number one contender at 155 pounds. Now, what was the big difference maker on the night? Were you surprised with how good Gaethje looked? 3 minutes on the clock. George, over to you.
Yeah, I don't want to be the Monday morning quarterback, but Dana actually said something that I was just feeling throughout the broadcast, and that was about those 2 weight cuts within 3 weeks. Justin Gaethje also alluded to it when he was when it was brought up, and he mentioned, that's something he felt he would have made a difference if it was him, but he obviously couldn't answer it on behalf of Tony. And it's hard to argue with Tony's success. Hasn't lost in almost a decade, 15-2 now overall. He's a stud. He's a former champion too. But yeah, Gaethje, like, focusing on the winner, that game plan, he executed it perfectly. He was disciplined. He listened to his coach. We've seen Justin kind of come through even before the UFC, and boy, that guy was wild at times. And now he was polished and straight and scientific. He mixed in his kicks. His punches were beautiful. And how about recovering from that shot that almost sent him to the moon? That was an amazing comeback for Justin Gaethje. Credit to him.
Yeah, superb performance by Justin Gaethje. But how do you feel right now if you're Tony Ferguson? Goes unbeaten for 12 fights, never got his shot at that undisputed belt. You got a feel for the guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel for him big time, dude. Really, when you think about it, he's been preparing for one guy for a very long time in Khabib, and not being able to get that release. On top of that, getting the switch and having to fight somebody else and coming up short. When really, I don't know that there are many people on the planet that could have beat Justin Gaethje that night, and I'm including the champion. That would have been a tough fight for him as well. You have to remember, Tony Ferguson hasn't had this feeling of loss for like the last 8 years. That's a different mindset. I feel bad for him, but I hope he can recover and get back as soon as he can.
And on that topic, John, obviously we all know what should be next for Justin Gaethje, but what about El Cucuy? Where does Tony Ferguson go from here? I mean, what's your take on that?
Man, his next fight is going to be an important one, right? As Go said, the mental state that you've got to be in, not having to deal with loss along this, whole long stretch. Where do you recover? And man, the other thing about it is you don't want to slip too far down the rankings, but man, there's some absolute killers at the top, so you can't slide back too far. It's tough to see what could happen. I mean, I would like to see maybe a matchup with Conor McGregor. I mean, maybe that would be a possibility there. But I mean, I know Conor's out there calling out the entire world, trying to slide in wherever he can. There's names like Dustin Poirier out there that could be a fantastic matchup as well. So there's definitely names, but I think you got to be a little bit careful here because Tony Ferguson is 36 years old. It's not like he can just start over multiple times. He's got another run left in him. There's no question about it, but he doesn't have, an unlimited amount of time to do about it. So it's going to have to be a smart selection. Look, mentally, I think this had to be an exhausting process for him. I understand the weight cut thing too, but man, just dealing with this whole thing. You think about how mentally taxing this whole world has been on us. He went through it all in this matchup. So listen, take some time, heal up, don't rush back, and then choose wisely.
Absolutely. It's going to be really interesting to see how he bounces back. And the big question now is what happens with the winner of the co-main event? The night's co-main event saw the king of cringe look anything but cringeworthy as Henry Cejudo finished Dominic Cruz and surprised everybody by announcing his retirement from the sport of mixed martial arts. It was met with a combination of respect and cynicism online. Some suggested it was a squeeze play to get a contract from the UFC. Some were saying he's timed it perfectly, while others have said there's a lot more to give. But he's going out on his own terms. So has he timed it right? 3 minutes on the clock goes. What's your take?
Well, when it comes to Henry Cejudo, I mean, when has he ever let us forget any of his greatness? It's a big deal for him. The gold medal, the champions, being champ. It's all we hear. So on this one, I have to imagine that he's going to come around. There's probably going to be some kind of negotiation. Maybe he needs a little bit of time. Who knows? But honestly, this is a guy who his legacy means so much to him. Think about, why is he fighting guys like Dominic Cruz? Why does he want to fight Jose Aldo? Because he wants to separate himself from some of these greats that we talk about. When we talk about the greats of all time, you have to nitpick. And one thing you look back on is how many times did these guys face former champions and what did they do to them? That's something that Henry Cejudo has tried to sell us on for a very long time. So for him to just walk away on the verge of greatness, remember, everything he's done has practically been in the UFC. And he's achieved a lot in a short amount of time. I think he has a lot more to give. And I think he's going to show us that. I think he'll be back, guys.
John, Cejudo's already accomplished pretty much everything you could hope for in the sport, even though he's not been in the sport that long. Titles in 2 weight classes, champ status, defeated legends. What's actually left for him to achieve in the sport at this point?
It's kind of funny because as much as I really didn't like the Jose Aldo matchup, I didn't like the way it came together. I understood from a business perspective, going down to Brazil, having him fight there. I really wasn't into it. But when Henry Cejudo revealed that one of the things he was considering was, had he beat Dominic Cruz, is going ahead and facing Aldo. And then if he did that, he would have beat the best flyweight of all time, the best bantamweight of all time, and the best featherweight of all time. As soon as he said that, I thought, my God, I never considered that. Like, that would be a heck of an accomplishment. So you know what? I hated the Aldo matchup. Now I want to see him come back and do it. I want to see him try to make that accomplishment real. But I tell you what, I think he's out, at least for now, man. I saw how emotional his longtime coach, Eric Galbadosine, was. I looked over at him. He was crying, tearing up, very, very emotional. Eric's not that good of an actor. I've seen him act. He's not that good, so I don't know if it's going to happen.
George, are you buying this as a legitimate retirement? Is he really done, or do you think we'll see him back in the octagon again? He kind of left the door a little bit open in the post-fight press conference. What do you reckon?
John just killed me right now because apparently that call from Dr. Fauci wasn't true. I guess I got caught up in the whole acting thing. But all right, okay. I think he wants to be compared with some of the greats. He still has to add to that resume. Us as media and maybe the fans, heck, we're the ones that might push him back there when he realizes he doesn't have the resume yet to be a GOAT in MMA. What he's done is awesome, but there's a lot of GOATs that get considered when you talk about that stuff. Combat sports athlete, greatest ever. He has an awesome case for that one. That shiny gold medal, respect. But let's take some time off. Let's see. He'll probably have to take at least this year off and see where he's at. He's got the lady, and he wants to have a family, and he's had a long career, Body's been through a lot. But I think he'll be back in 2021. This has just been a stressful year for everybody, him included.
We may not have seen the end of the King of Cringe. Triple C, maybe quadruple C next time, with the last one being for comeback. Who knows? Francis Ngannou scared the living daylights out of everybody watching when he separated Jairzinho Rozenstruik from his senses in just 20 seconds in their heavyweight clash at UFC 249. We all know Dana wants to book that Stipe Miocic-Daniel Cormier trilogy fight as soon as possible, and some have even suggested that Stipe could be stripped of his belt if he doesn't commit to a date soon. If that were to happen, and you're Daniel Cormier, do you want any part of a fight with Francis Ngannou at this point in your career, even if there's a vacant title on the line? John, I know John Jones has already told you that you could knock him out. I was there when he told you. So that makes you the power puncher of the group. So you can lead off with this. We've got 2 minutes on the clock. Over to you.
Hey, man, if I'm Daniel Cormier, I don't want no piece of Francis Ngannou. I don't want any piece of that ever. But listen, I think Daniel Cormier is a different cut, man. I could see him going for that. I could see him, the glory, man, that type of a big win in his final career, beating the scary, scary guy. And he knows he's got the wrestling advantage. So there are ways for him to win that fight. But I got to be honest with you, I don't love the matchup itself, man. I hope this trilogy can get cleared up. I mean, if Cormier wins, it kind of wrecks Ngannou a little bit, right? And this hype train is so rolling strong right now, and I hate to ruin him as a contender. And if Ngannou does land that big left hand like he did on Jairzinho and knocks out Daniel Cormier in his final fight in the UFC, man, I'd hate to see that. So I hope this trilogy can get done. I don't want to see that Ngannou-Cormier matchup.
George, DC does not shy away from anyone. We know this, but this is a man who said he was going to retire a few months ago. So he's basically just adding layers onto his career at this point. Does he really want to take a fight against a guy as dangerous as Francis Ngannou?
I think he wants to settle this trilogy with Stipe the most. Stipe's the last one to put him out, so that right there takes front and center. But it's really sounding more and more like Stipe just is not going to fight in the next 3 to 6 months. And I think Cormier is opening himself up for that possibility. Now, may I remind you guys, when Ngannou beat Cain Velasquez, I remember it's DC and Justin Willis. And I think Justin Willis at the time was with AK. I've seen him recently over at American Top Team. But I remember they both went on social media and they kind of like added them to the list. You know what I mean? They were standing up for their teammate a little bit. So who knows? Maybe if that resurfaces, maybe that could be a motivation for DC to avenge the loss to his teammate Cain Velasquez.
What about you, Goes? Do you walk away and say, look, I've won the belt already. I've got nothing to prove. I was a champ. I've done it all. Or do you go out there and try and beat the scariest man in the UFC to become a 2-time champ and walk away with a belt over your shoulder one more time? This is obviously if the Stipe fight is off the table. What do you reckon?
It's not that he can't do it. It's just he's not motivated by the belt. He's had the belt. That's something he's already had. I really think what it comes down to is avenging a loss. That's what motivates him. And I don't know that he'd have the proper motivation with Francis.
Awesome. And that brings us on to our final topic on Spinning Back Clique this week. UFC 249 wasn't just about the fights at the top of the card. There were outstanding performances from top to tail on a spectacular night of fights. But all things considered, guys, who gets your MVP, your man of the night, woman of the night, fighter of the night award for the event that will obviously go down in history as the first sporting event to take place since COVID-19. Is it one of the men we've talked about already, or is it someone from further down the card? We've got 2 minutes left on the clock, guys. George, lead us off.
Yes, because I know these guys were going to take this guy if I didn't take him. Calvin Kattar, how did he not get a bonus for starters? But those elbows, I mean, it was one on the feet with the right elbow, and then he missed with that missile on the follow-up. But then on the ground, that's what sliced them up and opened them up, was he threw that other elbow. Even prior to that, the beautiful 1-2s that were being delivered. And thank you for UFC for putting me on that media list that shows you the behind the scenes stuff. Oh, guys, I'm sure you've heard that the flesh, those guys just connecting in all the fights, but especially in that one. I got to give it to my man Calvin Kattar. That was a nice bounce back fight for him, and he's definitely a top 5 guy. Give him a top 5 guy. That guy needs to be talked about with those other guys like Ortega and the Zombie and the rest of the gang that's trailing Volkanovski and Holloway.
Yeah, it's a superb performance. Took him a while to get warmed up, but once he did, he was absolutely firing. Goes, who gets your vote?
Calvin was a great choice, George, but I'm going to go with Francis Ngannou. The guy put in just seconds of work. He went in, and not only did he do it in front of millions of people, he did it again in front of the former heavyweight champion, Daniel Cormier, which I believe will put a lot of pressure on that whole heavyweight situation, guys. I think the only way it could have gotten really nasty was if Francis came in and steamrolled, and that's exactly what he did. It was picture perfect.
John, you were there. Bring us home, my friend. Who was your standout performer of the night?
Well, speaking of getting nasty, give me Thug Nasty himself, Bryce Mitchell, man. This dude looked absolutely fantastic. Credit to Charles Rosa for being as tough as he could be, but Bryce Mitchell to me is the real deal. He's got the game. He's got the personality. He's got the down south accent. It sounds like now he's going to have camo shorts to go along with it, man. I thought this was a star-making performance. Yes, this was a big card. To me, Thug Nasty has announced himself as the real deal for the UFC.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, gentlemen. Superb edition of Spinning Back Clique. Huge thank you to gorgeous George and Ghost from MMA Junkie Radio. And make sure you keep it locked to MMA Junkie John on social media as John Morgan brings us everything you need to know from Jacksonville over the course of the next week. Double duty, well, treble duty for John. He's only a third of the way there. Great stuff from you guys this week. Thanks so much for joining us on Spinning Back Clique. We'll be back again in a week's time.